You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm the host of The Back 40, Mike Bryan, agribusiness specialist at Trillium Mutual Insurance. Technology on the farm has come a long way. I remember my grandfather talking about the horses that he used to keep, and then my dad talking about the switch over to tractors, and many of the innovations that I saw throughout my career in farming. In more recent years, we've seen things such as the GPS and auto steer on various different pieces of equipment, and farmers are always looking for that next piece of technology. Well, something that's coming down the road, and we're going to see more and more of, is autonomous robots. Robots that are actually working in the field by themselves, doing tasks that frees up labor to do something else. Today, we're going to be speaking with Sougata Pahari of Koretchi Innovations, and we're going to be talking about those autonomous robots. Sougata, welcome to the Back 40.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Could you give our listeners just a little bit of a background about who you are and how you got interested in autonomous robots?
I'm a mechanical and materials engineer by training, and I have a few years of experience working in the electronics industry in Europe and America before I moved to Canada in 2016 and started Koretchi Innovations, Inc. about 2.5 months later. My interest into robotics goes back while during my days in university, where we used to participate in different competitions. We won a few, we lost a lot. All of it was very good learning opportunity. And so when I moved to Canada in March of 2016, I realized that because I was completely new, I did not know where it's safe to walk, because I know if lakes are frozen and it has snowed, you cannot distinguish between a lake and a farm or even a park. And so at that point, I started thinking about a robot that you could remotely pilot onto such areas to tell you whether it's safe to walk or not, especially with the frozen lake. And so we started building that. We had a prototype made and realized that there isn't enough market. And so that was our first pivot. We took one of the features of that robot, which was to dispense biodegradable red paint to warn people that the ice is either too thin or it's just cracked. We basically started building another robot, which was to paint lines in athletic fields. So we took soccer as the benchmark because it's the world's most popular sport, and found out that it takes 2 people 3 hours to do the first line application in the beginning of the season. And then every week this has to be repeated, which takes about an hour. This is one of those simple tasks that can be very easily automated. So we did that for some time. Once again, realized that it's not very easy to sell to municipalities, and then pivoted once again into farm sector. So we took the spray nozzles, pointed them sidewards, and started building a robot that could carry enough chemicals to fumigate vineyards, which were quite accessible from the Hamilton region where we initially started out. That's how we got into the robotics into agriculture field.
So you've developed a few prototypes of this. What all does your system consist of, and what's it capable of?
When it comes to the different versions of our Romeo series of farming robots, the features and the parts are actually quite modular. So we didn't have to redo all the software part. We just have the software with some minor tweaks into different hardware. And what we did is we have the software with complex path generation algorithms. It has autonomous navigation, obstacle avoidance, even voice interactive features. This comes with hardware platform, be it a tracked or a wheeled version, 4 or 6-wheeled version, depending on your needs. And then this is accompanied by a physical joystick which has a safety override, so you can do it, stop it at any time, even without approaching the robot. To top it all up, we have basically given a tablet which you can have complete control over the robot, over the internet too. So you could be sitting in your house 20 miles away and control a robot in the farm. You can even interact with somebody who's standing in front of the robot. You could get to see their video. You can talk with them. It's a two-way voice communication. To power this whole thing, we've tried to keep it as much battery powered as possible. We understand the needs. There are so many applications which has a higher power requirement. So the battery can last between 3 and 12 hours, depending on the model and depending on the application. But this is expandable with an additional battery pack or a gasoline powered generator, which can give you a range of up to 24 hours of runtime.
So how big are these units?
So our smallest robot, the Romeo Mini, weighs about 120 kilograms. Our largest one, the Romeo 8CT, is about 500 kilograms. The width is about 66 inch for the bigger one, the length being about a 60 inch. And this is capable of carrying about 300 kilograms of different items. Even the small one is powerful enough to pull a pickup truck.
That's a lot of power.
Yes, that is.
For a very small package.
Yes, the small one is essentially 2 horsepower, but it doesn't need to go at 40 kilometers an hour. Many of these tractors, for most of their lives, they only function at about 8 kilometers an hour, but the top speed is like 40 kilometers an hour or even more. Because we limit our speed to 8 kilometers an hour, our top speed, and navigation speed can be even lower, we can function much more efficiently. It actually adds to greenhouse gas savings.
Not only that, but if you don't have an operator sitting on it there's not that temptation that you've got to push that a little bit faster because you're just too impatient to wait on it. It's fine with running just, if it has to run at 2 kilometers, it can run, or it can run at 4, and you can leave it set, and it'll do that for many hours after somebody would be tired and have to take a break from it.
You're absolutely right, Mike. There's so many applications like weeding, which you have to do at very slow speed, because if you do it too fast, you may actually end up damaging the plant you're trying to grow. And you may actually spread the weeds even further if you just go way too fast, and you may miss them. When it comes to patience, let's call it that, you can't beat a robot.
I remember many years ago actually cultivating edible beans, scuffling beans. And the first trip through when they were small was done at about 1 to 1.25 miles per hour. So maybe 2 kilometers an hour maximum. When you're trying as an operator to keep a tractor, that's extremely boring, and you have to have your wits about you. Something like this, it's ideally suited to that because it's not going to get tired. It's not going to lose focus, and it's not going to be bored by it either.
Exactly. And while it does this, it can keep collecting data for you and keep improving the results overall. You can get comparative data over the last 5 years that I've been running this robot and collecting data. How has my growth patterns changed? And can I change up my methods to increase the yield even further?
Where are you trying these out now? Who's got these? What sort of operations are making use of the robotic technology from your firm?
We have made a few prototypes. The first robot was actually sold to Niagara College. They're using it to carry out research in their vineyards. The biggest one, the Romeo 8CT, is actually named after the company which ordered it because they gave us so many inputs. We were so happy that we named it after them. It's Haggerty Creek Inc., based out of Chatham. They're using it primarily for spreading clover over winter wheat, for collecting data of soil, soil sampling. Now they have also started using it for inter-row weeding within vegetable crops.
Now, a lot of those tasks are something that you used to do, particularly the clover was something you used to do from an ATV. I would assume that anything that you could mount or tow with an ATV then would be perfect for something like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Pretty much every ATV implement that has a 2-inch hitch can be automated by this. We need some additional actuators that we can easily mount on, stuff that you would typically turn around and pull a lever to engage, say, hoe. That can be automated too. And all of this is possible using the tablet itself. From the tablet, you can select any waypoint within the map and say, I want this to be actuated here and deactuated in this location. And it does all of that for you. If it faces any problems, you get a notification on your tablet.
Now, you said it's doing monitoring as well of the crops. What sort of monitors do you have on it? What sort of sensors does it have with it?
So the sensors are optional at this point. In addition to the obstacle avoidance sensors, it detects obstacles using cameras and sonar and LiDAR. In addition to that, we also have the option to mount cameras sidewise. And we have carried out experiments and generated an AI-based machine learning model, which allows you to take pictures of grapes as it's navigating between the vines in the vineyard, and then upload it to the cloud where the computation takes place. It gives you a yield of every portion of your vineyard. It takes those pictures, and instead of giving you an average yield, it tells you in this part of your vineyard, your yield is approximately this. And this is even before you harvest. It's much earlier in the season. So you can start making promises. You can start planning what you're going to do with all those grapes. If it's table grapes, you can start making promises to supermarket chains, for instance, for selling. Or if it is wine grapes, now you can budget how much grapes you're going to get and how many bottles of wine you can produce far more accurately than what you would do with manual methods.
It's something that we've always wanted to be able to do. We look at a field and say, well, I wonder what that's going to yield. Looks really good.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes we're not far off, and sometimes it looks really good and you get it in the bin. There's not nearly as much there. This is something that certainly is going to change, as you say, that budgeting and that ability to decide how many inputs you're going to put on that, depending on what it sees in the field.
Yes. In addition to this, there are two additional ways this data can be used. For instance, if a part of your vineyard is not doing so well, you see the yield has been consistently low, you can choose to fertilize more in that area using variable rate fertilization instead of blanketing the entire vineyard with the same rate. And if a part of your vineyard is doing particularly very well, you can choose those grapes, handpick those grapes to make a different blend of wine, a premium blend, which might have more sugar content. The same goes for other orchard crops like apples. We also have machine learning models that can count apples well in advance. It gives you more freedom. It gives you more data, so you can take a much more informed decision on how to run your operation.
And depending on what you've got for sensors, things like disease pressure that you may see in a vineyard or an orchard, that's something you could detect a lot earlier because of the units going through, having a look at it on a regular basis.
Absolutely. We're working on those aspects of it. What we have is a mini autonomous tractor going about the field doing tasks. It can do other tasks that we are now programming it to do or basically experimenting with. This year has been very good with experimentation. Last year, because of COVID, we didn't get to go out to any farm after March. It did set us back a little bit, but we're back on track.
So what have you got it doing now in the vineyards?
In the vineyards, we have it, again, mostly data collecting. And now we are coming up with a new version, which will allow you to mow the grass in between the vines. It's an important job because you need to keep the facilities maintained. If you do not mow them at least once every 2 weeks, preferably once every week, then you encourage the growth of weeds, which encourages the influx of non-beneficial insects too. In addition to mowing, data collection, these would be the two primary tasks. Later on, we would be taking on more advanced tasks such as harvest automation, where you can basically, especially for table grapes, which is still hand harvested, you can have it with a follow me feature where it follows the workers and makes them far more efficient. It wouldn't exert as much physical pressure on them having to carry the grapes themselves and then offload it to a bigger bin nearby.
You either have somebody on a tractor that's bringing a wagon with you, or you have this thing that carries along behind you. It doesn't get tired, and it's one less person that you have to have out there in order to make your people efficient.
It's very hard to attract local talent into agriculture because it's hard work. Let's admit it. It's not easy and it's highly seasonal. Through robots, we are trying to attract new talent and at the same time reduce the need to move people from outside the region. You want to keep the local economy as strong as possible.
So you're not really looking to replace a lot of existing jobs there. You're more looking to supplement where we can't find workers.
Exactly. There are going to be tasks such as pruning, which are highly specialized. We don't expect to automate that anytime soon. But there are simple tasks like fertilizing, mowing, weeding. These are the things that robots are perfect for. You don't need a human with their extreme capabilities to do such simple tasks. And they're grueling and it's not very attractive. Let's admit it.
Oh, yeah, I can vouch for that. The way the technology is now, for something like mowing between the vines, is that something that we've completely replaced people then for doing that, or are there places it can't get to?
Well, there are definitely places it can't get to. Like if you see the beginning and the end of the vines, they typically have steel cable to tether the start and end posts. The robot cannot get between those posts because it's a very delicate task, at least not as yet. Mm-hmm. So you would need somebody to go in manually do those things, but it's far less grueling and time consuming for them to go ahead and do these tasks. And you can use the same people to do more complicated tasks like pruning.
So they're freed up to do the stuff that the robot can't do yet.
Exactly. Yes. We're seeing, because we consider golf courses as our secondary market, we have a similar situation in golf courses. So we are building this robot, which we have been testing through the summer for automating golf ball picking. Based on our discussion, based on our tests, we found that people who were doing the picking and who were the poor people who were being targeted by the golfers because they are in a caged cart, they are still going to be needed to do higher functions like provide better service to the people who are coming to golf there. The robot can do the uninteresting, sort of dangerous task like picking the balls.
And if somebody targets them, well, there's nobody there to be hurt anyway. I know if I'm targeting, there's no worry there. If I'm aiming at it, I'm not going to hit it. That's just the way it is.
It's a smaller target to hit, yes, and you will be awarded with a few extra balls, perhaps.
It's the ones that miss it probably that need the more practice, that need the extra balls.
Yeah, it's going to be quite hard to hit a moving target, as you can understand.
Do you like what you're hearing from the Back 40? We'd like to hear from you. Send us an email with your comments and thoughts to theback40@trilliummutual.com or follow us on social media @trilliummutual. So we're talking a little bit about vineyards and orchards and grain farmers. Who do you see as being your target market for this type of technology?
So a lot of the processes and food grains, I'm talking about wheat, corn, soybean, canola, these processes have already been automated to a great extent. Our focus is more on the high value crops, which is fruits and vegetables. Because of the labor shortage, a lot of these fruit and vegetable farms have been converted to either housing or field crop growing areas simply because they couldn't find people to work in those farms. Our focus is now to automate those so we don't have to always import food, at least the fruits and vegetable portion from outside the country. And this goes for every locality. Within the fruits and vegetables, we are a little bit more focused on vineyards and orchards because we have the fortune of being relatively close to these areas.
So some people may look at this and they say, well, it's a nice toy and it's got to be expensive. What are you looking at from an economic standpoint on this? What do you feel is a reasonable payback for one of your units?
That is actually a very important question, but because we don't want this to be a toy, we want this to be a co-worker. And our focus since the beginning has been to make sure farmers actually don't just find it interesting, but also they receive short enough return on investment to justify such an investment. So we target between 2 to 3 years return on investment on all of our units. And these units, all our robots are designed for multitasks. So if it's weeding, it can also do something else, like seeding in addition to weeding, or spreading cover crops like clover. So it's not a single-use application because the weeding season comes after the seeding season, and then the cover crop is in a different time. So the robot can be easily outfitted different sets of implements, and many of which, thanks to the ATV industry, are already there. And we don't have to develop everything from scratch.
And I'm assuming too, like things that you get into the orchards and vineyards, sometimes that you end up working with some chemicals that are not very good for human health. That's something that down the road we may see automated as well.
We definitely are automating those processes and using less of it, because humans are in a hurry. They have to move at a particular speed. The robots can see and spray the areas and give a different rate depending on how bad the disease is. Like in case of grapes, we have powdery mildew, which is a big problem.
When you start talking about targeting, it's, as you say, the powdery mildew is there, but if it isn't in that part of them, then we have a tendency to just spray the whole field. This would be able to just spray that portion that is needed. Am I correct?
No, absolutely. Studies have shown that you can save up to 90% in chemical use just by going for targeted spraying. We have not been doing targeted spraying the past few decades just because we can't afford to have a human go on the foot and do that. It has to be done in large scale, especially if you're doing commercial farming. Typically has to be done that way. But now with the advent of robotics in farming, time is not that much of a problem because robots can afford to work a lot more and be more precise. They're not going to skip something just because they're bored.
Or speed through it. That tendency is always looking at our watch and saying, well, if I just push the throttle a little bit forward or go one more gear, I can get that much more done. And that reduces that accuracy which is necessary for that targeted application.
The speed actually becomes very useful in another situation. So the powdery mildew can also be combated with ultraviolet light, but it has to be done at night and it has to be done very slow.
And there's an ideal spot for the robot.
Exactly. So there are some experiments going on in Europe with such an application, which we also hope to bring to North America soon.
So a lot of the beauty of this technology, it's not just about the units that you've built, it's also about the software and the apps, the ability to adapt it. This would adapt to something like an existing tractor fairly easily, would it not?
Yes, for the modern tractors, yes. Easy is just figure of speech. We know that once we get into the details, the nitty-gritty, it will get quite complex. And there are companies dedicated to doing just this function, the likes of John Deere, Raven. For now, because we are a small team and we are still bootstrapped, we'll stay out of the tractor's way. We'll just keep making these small ones. And also because these ones are much more easily deployable, far more easy to operate in the target area that we want to go into. There are not as many large-sized vegetable and fruit farms in Canada as there are the smaller ones. So that's the area we want to focus on right now.
The technology is coming, though. It's going to hit all different sizes. And I think one of the beauties of it is that we've always gone to bigger equipment because that's the limiting factor is the person that's driving it. Where something like this, it doesn't really matter if you have 1 unit or you have 5 units. Those 5 units can cover sometimes as much area as a larger unit, and it still doesn't take any more labor to run it.
I totally agree with that. Also, if one of those units fail, one of the smaller units fail, the remaining ones can work overtime and still make up for the loss. One of those big units have 2 problems. One is if they fail, of course, your work comes to a standstill until you repair it. But also soil compaction is a big problem in the ag industry. And our robots typically have a soil compaction of just 3 pounds per square inch, which is less than your garden tractor. And that's very good for the soil.
That keeps a lot of that weight that we do worry about. I mean, there's a lot of heavy equipment runs over the soil there. If you could do that with something that's much, much lighter and accomplish the same thing in the same type of economics, that certainly would be very attractive to a lot of people.
Yes, and if you're using it in an open field, because you have lower soil compaction, you won't need to till the soil every year, which has a lot of trickle-down positive impact. For instance, the earthworm population isn't being damaged. The microbes in the soil do not like too much sunlight. When you till the soil, you're exposing them, and that reduces their population. So no-till agriculture is the future for many of these crops. I'm not saying all. We should probably be focusing on that also because it's good for the environment.
Yeah, and this is ideal for a lot of those tasks that, as you say, from the perspective of no-till agriculture, it's something that it's going to be ideally suited for down the road.
Yes, absolutely.
So speaking of down the road, what are we looking at down the road here 5 years? Where do you think the industry is going to go? And what do you think we're going to see as far as the abilities of these autonomous robots?
Well, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to take some time. And so what we've been doing is focusing on those farmers who are very open to new technology and they understand the risk. They have the patience to deal with the time and the slow service while we develop the technology to meet their expectations. Down the line, I would expect pretty much every farm to have a robot, like every farm has a tractor. I mean, when tractors came, they didn't suddenly replace all horse-drawn carriages.
Nope.
It took time, and we think this will become something as fairly simple as mowing or weeding. We'll just automate it with a robot. It would be a no-brainer at all.
And some of the other things as far as seeding, I know that there's some technology out there in the cropping industry there for planters that are set up to automatically plant the field. Individual units that you turn loose into a field and they figure out how to plant it and you go and do something else.
Though you still have to direct them and tell them what you're planting, what would be the best time.
Yeah.
They will not be able to take decisions anytime soon unless they're connected to a network. And the network does the research and people publish their data and say, okay, the weather is good enough, now you can plant.
But that's still a human decision at this point.
At this point, and you would want to have some control over how you grow your food.
I would think that most farmers would. Those are the things that they want to do. They want to make that decision of when you plant, what you plant, how much you plant, all of those sort of things.
Absolutely.
But certainly, within certain parameters, they'd love to be able to say, if you reach this condition, you cut the seed back. And if you reach this condition, you increase the seed when they're doing planting. That's technology that isn't that far away.
Absolutely. I don't even know what's going to happen in 10 years, but within the 5 years, we'll see a lot more of this.
What's the future for your company? What do you see coming down the road here? How soon will you have these available commercially?
We are actually taking orders right now for the Romeo 8CT, our big robot, for deliveries this winter and fall. As for the other robots, we would be releasing some and demonstrating them before the end of the year. But we would like to do more tests early next year, next spring, before we start taking orders for delivery during the summer and fall.
It's fair to say this isn't technology for everybody. This is for someone who is interested in playing with new technology and at the cutting edge of what it can do. Am I correct on that?
Yes, and there's another group of farmers which fit into this, people who are finding it very difficult to convince the next generation to take up farming. It may not sound very appealing that you need to drive a tractor and get your job done, but if you tell them that, hey, here's a robot, play with it, and maybe get some work done while doing so, we think the latter case might make it much more appealing to get some young blood into this industry, because farmers are getting old and young people aren't replacing them at the rate we would want to.
Yes, and I think of a comment that Russ Barker made on a previous podcast here. And Russ, for the listeners that don't remember, Russ was dealing with drone technology there. And the comment that he made was, if he had been younger, he would have probably been a fairly serious gamer. And it's a lot of fun to run the drone. And this is a very similar thing here. There's a lot of people are going to be very fascinated to be able to run this technology and see what it'll do and adapt it to new technology. I mean, Russ is approximately my age, so he's a little older, but certainly younger people are going to look at this as something that's right up their alley there, that, what can I make this do? I know a lot of farmers are going to want to adapt that technology to what they see as the tasks that they feel that it would be most beneficial for them.
I absolutely agree with Russ.
You're a little younger than both of us, though. I never really had the opportunity to become a gamer. Technology, when I was growing up, was more like Space Invaders, and that's not what a serious gamer would consider these days. So all of this research and technology, you've been at this for 5 years. That has to take a fair bit of funds and a fair bit of money. How are you funded, and where do you find the money in order to do the research and keep the company going?
So we have bootstrapped all these years. We've also received some generous support from the Canadian government, as well as the Ontario government through the various schemes. But now, while we have our robots ready to start selling, not just in Canada, but also the US, we are raising our seed round now. We would like to invite anybody who is interested to participate.
So you're looking for people to invest with you?
Yes, invest. Also, we'll be looking for dealers in different areas. We have some areas recognized, but we want to reach out farther into whole of Canada within the next year.
If people want to find out more information about yourself or Koretchi Innovations, how do they go about doing that?
We can be reached through our website, which is koretchi.com. The website will be revamped completely very soon. In addition, we can also be reached through social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We also can be reached through our email, which is info@koretchi.com.
Perfect. It's been a terrific conversation today. We've been talking with Sougata Pahari from Koretchi Innovations, Inc. about autonomous robots in the agricultural industry. At some point here, I'm sure that we're going to speak again as we're going to be looking for an update on what the next project that you've got. But today, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the Back 40.
Thanks for having me, Mike, and I look forward to returning again.
Join us next time when our guest will be Martin Ritzma. Martin is the driving force behind an initiative to get hay from Ontario out to drought-stricken areas of Western Canada. That's next time on The Back 40. You've been listening to The Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to The Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Brine. Until next time, take care and stay safe.